10 Nights of Dreams, Natsume Soseki, Night 1. The 100-Year Wait. I had a dream like this. I sat at her pillow, arms folded, as the woman lying on her back spoke in a quiet voice. I am going to die soon. Her long hair was spread across the pillow, and within it lay her face, soft in outline, slender and oval. Beneath the pure white of her cheeks, a warmth of color lingered just so, and her lips were, of course, red. She did not look as though she were dying, and yet, in that same quiet voice, she said it plainly. I, too, felt it with certainty. Yes, she is going to die. And so I leaned over her and asked, "Is that so? You are really going to die?" "Yes, I am," she said. And with those words, her eyes opened wide. They were large eyes, full of depth, framed by long lashes, and within them, nothing but darkness, pure black, and there, in the depths of those black pupils, my own reflection floated, clear and sharp. I gazed at the color and luster of those eyes, so dark they seemed to reach all the way through, and I thought, can she really be dying? I brought my lips close to her pillow and asked again tenderly, "You are not going to die, are you? You will be all right, won't you?" She kept her black eyes half-lidded, drowsy and still, and answered in the same quiet voice, "But I am dying. There is nothing to be done." "Then, can you see my face?" I asked with all my heart. "Can I see it?" she said, and smiled. "Why, there, look, it is reflected right there." I said nothing. I lifted my face from the pillow. Arms folded, I thought to myself, she is really going to die. After a while, the woman spoke again. "When I am dead, please bury me. Dig the hole with a large pearl shell. Then place a fragment of a fallen star as my grave marker, and wait beside my grave. I will come to meet you again." I asked her, "When will you come?" "The sun will rise, then it will set, then it will rise again, and set again. As the red sun falls from east to west, from east to west, can you wait through all of that?" I nodded in silence. The woman raised her voice just one quiet degree and said, with a kind of resolve, "Wait 100 years. Sit beside my grave for 100 years, and wait. I will surely come to you." I answered only, "I will wait." Then the image of myself that had floated so clearly in the depths of her black pupils began slowly to blur, like still water suddenly stirred, scattering the reflection on its surface. It began to dissolve, and then her eyes closed with a soft, final flutter. From between her long lashes, a tear fell down her cheek. She was already dead. I stepped down into the garden and dug the earth with a pearl shell. It was a large shell, smooth, with sharp edges. Each time I scooped the soil, moonlight caught the inner face of the shell and scattered in bright flickers. There was the smell of wet earth. After a time, the grave was dug. I placed the woman inside. Then, gently, I covered her with the soft soil, layer by layer. With each covering, moonlight shone again on the back of the pearl shell. Then I went and gathered a fragment of a fallen star and laid it lightly upon the earth. It was round, that fragment. I thought it must have worn smooth over the long ages of its fall, through the great sky, its edges wearing away until nothing was left but this curve. As I lifted it and set it in place, my chest and hands grew faintly warm. I sat down on the moss, thinking, from now I must wait like this for 100 years. I folded my arms and gazed at the round gravestone. And then, just as the woman had said, the sun rose from the east. It was large and deeply red, and just as she had said, it sank in time to the west. Red and full, it dropped away, slowly, without sound. 1, I counted. Before long, the crimson sun rose again, unhurried, and again it sank, without a word. 2, I counted, and so I went on counting. 1, and then 2, until I lost track of how many red suns I had seen. No matter how I counted, the red suns passed above my head in numbers I could not exhaust, and still 100 years had not come. At last, staring at the round moss-covered stone, I began to wonder, had the woman deceived me? Then, from beneath the stone, a green stem reached up toward me, growing at a slant. In moments, it had grown tall, reaching just to the level of my chest, where it stopped, and at the tip of that slender swaying stem, a single narrow bud, its head tilted ever so slightly, opened its petals, full and soft. A pure white lily bloomed before my face, its fragrance cutting through to the bone. From somewhere far above, a drop of dew fell, and the flower swayed under its own weight. Trembling, I leaned my face forward and pressed my lips to the white petals, cool and wet with dew. As I drew back from the lily, I looked up without thinking into the distant sky, and there a single star was blinking in the dawn. 100 years, I realized then. For the first time, 100 years had already come. Night 2. The Samurai's Mew. I had a dream like this. I left the master's chamber and made my way back along the corridor to my own room, where a paper lantern burned dimly. Resting one knee on the sitting cushion, I stirred the wick, and a clove blossom, like a small flower, fell with a soft sound onto the lacquered stand. At the same moment, the room brightened. The painting on the sliding door was by Busan. Black willows, thick and faint, near and far, and a cold-looking fisherman, his hat tilted, making his way along the embankment. In the alcove hung a scroll, Manju rising from the sea. Somewhere in the darkness, the last of a stick of incense still breathed its scent. The temple was vast and still, without a trace of human presence. The round shadow of the paper lantern cast upon the black ceiling. The moment I looked up, it seemed alive. Still kneeling on one knee, I lifted the edge of the cushion with my left hand and slipped my right hand beneath. It was there, right where I expected. Knowing it was there, I was calm. I smoothed the cushion back into place and settled heavily upon it. "You are a samurai," the master had said. "If you are a samurai, there is no reason you cannot attain enlightenment. And then, the way you go on, without attaining it, perhaps you are no samurai after all. The dregs of humanity," he said. "Oh, you're angry," he said, and laughed. "If it shames you, bring me proof of your enlightenment." And with that, he turned away, outrageous. Before the standing clock in the great room next door strikes the next hour, I will attain enlightenment. I swear it. And then I will enter his chamber again tonight. I will trade my enlightenment for the master's head. Without enlightenment, I cannot take his life. I must attain it, no matter what. I am a samurai, and if I cannot, I will take my own life. A samurai who has been shamed has no right to go on living. I will die cleanly. At that thought, my hand moved again without thinking, slipping beneath the cushion, and drew out the short sword in its red lacquered sheath. I gripped the hilt tight and swept the red sheath away, and in an instant the cold blade flashed once through the dark room. Something terrible seemed to drain away from the length of the blade, withdrawing toward the tip, gathering all its murderous intent into a single point. Seeing how that sharp edge was compressed helplessly, like the head of a needle forced to its finest point at the end of those 9.5 inches, I felt, suddenly and violently, the urge to drive it in. The blood in my body flowed toward my right wrist. The hilt I gripped grew slick and warm. My lips trembled. I sheathed the blade, drew it close to my right side, and then folded my legs into full meditation posture. Zhao Zhou said, "Mu. What is Mu?" "Rotten monk." I ground my teeth. I clenched my back teeth hard. Hot breath came rough through my nose. My temples pulled and ached. I forced my eyes open, twice their ordinary size. I could see the scroll. I could see the lantern. I could see the master's bald head, clear as if he stood before me. His wide mouth open, mocking, his laughter almost audible. Insufferable monk, that head must come off. I will attain enlightenment. Mew, mew. I pressed the word against the root of my tongue. And yet, even as I chanted moo, the smell of incense remained. What business does incense have? At a time like this, I balled my fist and struck my own head. Hard. I ground my back teeth together. Sweat broke from both sides. My back stiffened like a rod. The joints of my knees suddenly flared with pain. Even if my knees give way, I thought, what of it? But it hurt. It was agony. Mu would not come. Each time I felt it near, the pain surged back. Rage rose in me, resentment, bitter shame. Tears fell, one by one. I wanted to hurl myself against a great boulder, to shatter every bone, every scrap of flesh, into nothing. And still I endured it. I sat without moving. something unbearable filled my chest, and I held it there. That unbearable thing pressed upward through every muscle in my body, straining to burst through my pores, but everywhere was sealed, with no outlet anywhere, a cruelty without end. Then, gradually, my mind began to shift. The lantern, Busan's painting, the tatami, the shelves, they seemed to exist and not exist, to vanish, and yet remain. And still, Mu did not appear, not even a flicker. I was simply sitting, adrift, without direction, when, all at once, the clock in the room next door began to sound. Chime! I startled. My right hand moved instantly to the blade. The clock struck its second note. Chime. Night 3. The blind child on my back. I had a dream like this. I was carrying a 6-year-old child on my back. It was certainly my own child. But strangely, at some point I could not account for, the child had gone blind, and its head had been shaved bare. I asked, "When did you lose your sight?" "Oh, long ago," it answered. The voice was unmistakably a child's, but the manner of speaking was entirely that of an adult, and it spoke to me as an equal. On either side stretched green rice paddies. The path was narrow. Now and then the shadow of a heron passed through the darkness. "We've reached the paddies, haven't we?" said the child from my back. "How can you tell?" I asked, turning my face back toward it. "Because the herons are crying," it replied. And then, sure enough, a heron cried twice. Even though it was my own child, I felt a faint fear. Carrying something like this, there was no telling what lay ahead. I looked into the distance, searching for somewhere to abandon it, and there in the darkness I saw a large grove of trees. There, I thought, and the instant the thought formed, a sound came from my back. A low, quiet laugh. "What are you laughing at?" The child did not answer. It only said, "Father, am I heavy?" "Not at all," I replied. "You will be soon," it said. I said nothing and walked on, keeping the grove in my sights. The path through the paddies wound in irregular curves, and I could not make my way as I wished. After a while, the path forked. I stopped at the junction and rested briefly. "There should be a stone marker," the child said. And indeed there was. A square stone about 8 inches across, standing at about hip height. On its face, in red characters, left Haigakubo, right Horitabara. Though it was dark, the red letters were clearly visible, the color of a newt's belly. "Go left," the child commanded. I looked left. The grove from before was casting its dark shadow down from the high sky onto our heads. I hesitated for a moment. "No need to hold back," the child said again. I had no choice. I began walking toward the grove. In my mind, I thought, how does a blind child know everything like this? As I drew closer along the single path, the child said from my back, "It really is inconvenient, being blind. That's why I'm carrying you. Isn't that enough? I'm grateful to be carried, but it's hard being looked down on, even by one's own parent. Something in me turned sour. I wanted to reach the grove quickly and be rid of it. I quickened my pace just a little further, and you'll understand. It was a night just like this one. The child murmured from my back as though talking to itself. "What was?" I asked, my voice going tight. "What do you mean, what was?" "You already know," the child answered with a mocking tone. And then I felt as though I did know, and yet I could not say it clearly, only a feeling that it had been a night like this, and that a little further on I would understand. And the moment I understood, something terrible would happen. So before I could understand, I had to throw it away, get rid of it, and be free. I must not understand. I walked faster still. Rain had been falling for some time. The path grew darker with each step. I was nearly out of my mind. Only the small child on my back, clinging there, shining like a mirror that illuminated my entire past, present, and future, without missing a single fact. And this was my own child. And this child was blind. I could bear it no longer. Here, right here, just at the base of that cedar, the child's voice rang out clearly through the rain. I stopped without thinking. Without realizing it, I had entered the grove. About 6 feet ahead, the dark shape was indeed a cedar tree, just as the child had said. Father, it was right there, at the base of that cedar, wasn't it? Yes, I answered, before I could stop myself. In the 5th year of Bunka, the year of the dragon. And it did seem so, the 5th year of Bunka, the year of the dragon. It was exactly 100 years ago that you killed me. The moment I heard those words, a sudden and absolute awareness rose up in my mind that on a dark night like this, 100 years ago, in the 5th year of Bunka, the year of the dragon, here, at the base of this cedar, I had killed a blind person. The instant I realized, so I was a murderer. The child on my back became suddenly heavy, heavy as a stone Buddha. Night 4. The Old Man and the Snake. I had a dream like this. In the middle of a wide earthen floor, something like a low cooling platform had been set up, with small stools arranged around it. The platform gleamed with a dark shine. In one corner, an old man sat alone, drinking sake before a square tray. The side dish looked to be simmered vegetables. The sake had made the old man quite red. His face was smooth and glossy, not a wrinkle to be found anywhere. Only the full white beard he wore in abundance told you he was old. Young as I was, I found myself wondering, just how old is this man? Then the woman of the house came in, from the back, carrying a wooden pail she had filled from the bamboo water pipe. Wiping her hands on her apron, she asked, "How old are you, grandfather?" The old man swallowed a mouthful of simmered food and answered, without a care in the world, "I've forgotten." She tucked her white hands into her narrow sash and stood to the side, looking at his face. The old man raised a large, tea-bowl-sized cup, drank his sake in one long draught, and blew out a slow breath through his white beard. Then she asked, "Where is your home, grandfather?" He paused mid-breath and said, "Deep inside the navel." With her hand still tucked in her sash, she asked again, "Where are you going?" The old man raised that great cup again, drank another draught of hot sake, and blew out the same long breath. "Over there," he said. "Straight ahead?" she asked. And the breath he blew passed through the paper screen, through the willows below, and went straight out toward the riverbed. The old man stepped outside. I followed after him. A small gourd hung from his hip. From his shoulder, a square box was slung beneath his arm. He wore pale blue leggings and a pale blue sleeveless vest. Only his tabby socks were yellow. They looked as if they might be made of leather. The old man walked straight to the willow tree. 3 or 4 children were gathered there. Still smiling, the old man drew a pale blue hand towel from his waist. He twisted it long and thin, like a twisted cord, and laid it on the ground in the center. Then he drew a large circle in the dirt all around the towel. Finally, from the box on his shoulder, he took out a brass street vendor's flute. This towel is about to become a snake. Watch now, he said, again and again. The children stared at the towel with all their might. I stared too. Watch now, are you ready? He began to play the flute and walked in circles around the ring. I kept my eyes on the towel, but the towel did not move at all. The old man played on. Peep, peep, peep. He circled again and again. He walked on tiptoe in his straw sandals, lifting his feet with care, as if treading softly out of respect for the towel. He seemed both a little frightened and a little delighted. At last, the old man stopped the flute abruptly. He opened the lid of the box on his shoulder, pinched the end of the towel lightly, and tossed it in with a quick flick of the wrist. Left in there, it will become a snake. I'll show you soon. I'll show you soon. And with that, the old man began to walk. Straight ahead, he passed beneath the willows and went down the narrow path. I wanted to see the snake, so I followed him all the way along that narrow path. Now and then the old man called out as he walked, "Soon now," or "It's becoming a snake," until at last he began to sing, "Soon now, becoming a snake, it will surely come. The flute will sound." And he walked all the way to the bank of the river. There was no bridge. There was no boat. I thought, he will stop here now and show us the snake inside the box. But the old man waded straight into the river. At first, the water was only knee-deep, but gradually it rose to his waist, then his chest, until he disappeared from sight. And still he sang, walking straight ahead. Deeper now, night is falling. Straight ahead, until his beard was gone, and his face was gone, and his head and his hood were entirely gone. I stood among the rustling reeds, alone, waiting and waiting for the old man to climb up on the far bank and show me the snake. But the old man never came up. Night 5. The White Horse and the Vow. I had a dream like this. It was a very long time ago. an age that seemed close to the age of the gods. I had gone to war, and by ill fortune I was defeated, taken prisoner, and brought before the enemy's commander. In those days, people were all tall. They all wore long beards. They fastened leather belts at their waists, and from them hung swords like heavy staves. Their bows appeared to be made from thick wisteria vines, used as they were, unlacquered, unpolished, utterly plain, utterly ancient. The enemy commander gripped his bow at the center with his right hand and planted it in the grass before him, and sat upon something like an upturned crock. Looking at his face, I saw that his eyebrows were thick and unbroken, meeting heavily across the bridge of his nose. In those days, of course, there was no razor. I was a captive, so I could not sit upon anything. I sat cross-legged on the grass. On my feet, I wore large straw shoes, deep ones, as was the custom of that age. When standing, they came up to the knees. At their edges, a fringe of unbraided straw was left hanging like a tassel, swaying and scattering as one walked, an ornament of sorts. By the light of the bonfire, the commander looked at my face and asked, "Will you live or will you die?" This was the custom of that time. Every prisoner was asked this, without exception. To answer "live" meant to surrender. To answer "die" meant you would not yield. I answered, in a single word, "Die." The commander flung the bow from the grass and drew the heavy sword-like blade smoothly from his hip. A gust of wind drove the bonfire sideways. Flames licked across toward him. I spread my right hand open, like a maple leaf, turned my palm toward the commander, and raised it to eye level. A signal. Wait. The commander sheathed the thick blade with a sharp, metallic sound. Even in that age, there was love. I told him, "Before I die, I wish to see, just once more, the woman I love." The commander said he would wait until the night had turned and the cock crowed at dawn. I had to bring her here before the cock crowed. If the cock crowed and she had not come, I would be killed without seeing her. The commander sat where he was, gazing into the bonfire. I sat on the grass, my great straw shoes crossed before me, waiting for the woman. The night grew slowly deeper. Now and then, the bonfire shifted and collapsed. Each time it did, the flames surged forward toward the commander, as if in panic. Beneath his pitch-black brows, the commander's eyes flickered with light. Then someone came and threw a great armful of fresh branches into the fire. After a while, the fire crackled and popped, a bold sound as if hurling back the darkness. At that moment, the woman led out a white horse that had been tethered to the oak tree behind the camp. She stroked its mane 3 times, and with a single light motion leapt onto its tall back. No saddle, no stirrups, a bare horse. With her long white legs, she kicked its broad belly, and the horse broke into a full gallop. Someone had fed the bonfire anew, and in the distance the sky glowed faintly bright. The horse flew through the darkness, aimed toward that light. From its nostrils it breathed 2 pillars of fire. as it came flying on. Still, the woman drove her slender legs ceaselessly into the horse's sides. The horse ran so fast that the sound of its hooves seemed to ring through the air itself. The woman's hair streamed behind her in the darkness like a long trailing banner. And still she had not reached the place where the bonfire burned. Then, from the side of that pitch-dark road, there suddenly rang out a cock's crow. The woman pulled herself upright in an instant, hauling the reins she held in both hands with all her strength. The horse drove the iron shoes of its front hooves deep into the hard rock, sharp and fast. The cock crowed again. The woman cried out and released the reins all at once. The horse buckled at both knees. Together with its rider, it pitched forward, headlong. Below the rock was a deep ravine. The marks of those hooves remain in the rock to this day. The one who cried the cock's crow was Amatsu Sagume, the heavenly deceiving woman. For as long as those hoofprints are carved into that rock, Amatsu Sagume is my enemy. Night 6. Carving the Neo. Word had spread that Unkei was carving Neo guardian figures at the temple gate of Gokoku-ji. So I went to have a look as part of an afternoon walk. When I arrived, a considerable crowd had already gathered before me, busy with their opinions and commentary. 5 or 6 ken in front of the gate stood a great red pine, its trunk slanting at an angle to half conceal the ridge tiles of the gate, stretching all the way up into the distant blue sky. The green of the pine and the vermilion of the gate played off each other brilliantly. And the placement of the pine was fine. It cut diagonally across the left end of the gate, just enough not to obstruct the view, growing wider as it rose, thrusting out toward the eaves. There was something old-fashioned about it. It might well have been from the Kamakura period, and yet the onlookers were all, like me, people of the Meiji era. Among them, rickshaw men were the most numerous, no doubt standing there because they were waiting at the corner with nothing to do. "That's a big one," someone was saying. "Must have taken a lot more work than making a human being," said another. Then one man said, "Well now, a Neo Guardian. Do they still carve Neos these days?" "Is that right? I always thought all the Neos were ancient ones." Another man leaned in and said, "Powerful looking, isn't it? They say, you know, that since ancient times, there's been no one stronger than a Neo. Apparently, even stronger than Yamato Takeru." This man had his kimono tucked up behind him and wore no hat. He looked to be quite uneducated. Unkei, for his part, paid not the slightest attention to the opinions of the crowd. He went on working his chisel and mallet without ever once turning around. Perched high up on the scaffolding, he carved steadily into the area around the Neo's face. On his head, Unkei wore something like a small eboshi cap, and the wide sleeves of what might have been a suho robe were tied behind his back. His entire appearance was thoroughly antique. He seemed utterly out of keeping with the chattering crowd below. I found myself wondering, how can Unkei still be alive at this hour? How strange a thing, I thought. And yet I went on standing there and watching. Unkei himself, however, showed not the slightest sign of finding anything strange or remarkable. He carved with total absorption. A young man beside me, who had been gazing upward at this sight, turned toward me and said, "That is Unkei. All right, we don't exist to him. His manner says, under heaven, there is only the Neo and himself." Magnificent! I found this an interesting thing to say. I glanced at the young man, and he continued without pause, "Look at how he uses that chisel and mallet. He has reached a state of perfect and sovereign freedom." At that moment, Unkei had just carved a thick eyebrow horizontally, 1 sun in height, and the instant he turned the chisel blade upright, he drove the mallet down at a diagonal from above. A single stroke cut through the hard wood, and a thick curl of shaving flew up in answer to the blow, and in that instant the side of a flaring, angry nose emerged from the wood, fully formed. The way the blade went in was utterly without hesitation. It seemed to hold not the slightest doubt. How does he manage it, so casually wielding the chisel, and yet the eyebrows and nose come out exactly as he intends them? I murmured, almost to myself, in admiration. Then the young man said, "No, he is not making the eyebrows and nose with the chisel. Those eyebrows and that nose are already buried inside the wood. He is simply excavating them with the force of chisel and mallet. It is exactly like digging a stone out of the earth. So there is no way to go wrong." It was at that moment that I first understood. So that is what sculpture is? And if that were truly so, I thought anyone could do it. I was suddenly seized with the desire to carve a Neo myself. I left the crowd and went straight home. I took a chisel and hammer from the toolbox and went out to the back of the house. There, a great oak had been blown down in a recent storm. I had a woodcutter saw it into manageable pieces to use as firewood, and quite a number of these were stacked up there. I chose the largest one and began to carve with great energy. But, to my misfortune, no Neo appeared. In the next one, I had no luck either. In the third, there was no Neo to be found. I carved through the firewood pile, one piece after another, from one end to the other, but not a single one held a Neo within it. At last, I understood. In the wood of the Meiji era, there are simply no Neos buried inside. And with that, I also came to understand, more or less, why Unkei is still alive today. Night 7, The Great Ship and Eternal Regret. I was on a large ship. That much was certain. Day and night, without pause, the ship poured out black smoke and cut through the waves, pressing forward. The sound was tremendous, but I had no idea where we were going. Only the sun, rising from beneath the waves like a red-hot fire poker, climbing to the very top of the tall mast, hanging there for a time, and then, before I knew it, overtaking the great ship and moving ahead, until at last, with a sound like a hiss, it sank again beneath the waves. Each time it did, the green swells in the far distance boiled up the color of sappanwood, and the ship, with its tremendous sound, gave chase. But it never caught up. One day I caught hold of one of the ship's crew and asked, "Is this ship heading west?" The crewman looked at me with a puzzled expression for a moment, then said, "Why do you ask?" "Because it seems to be chasing the falling sun." The crewman laughed out loud and walked away. From somewhere, a voice was chanting, "The sun that goes west, does it end in the east? Is that true? The sun that rises in the east, is its home in the west? Is that true? The body rides the waves, the oar is my pillow. Let it drift, let it drift." I went forward to the bow. A crowd of sailors were gathered there, hauling in a thick rope. I felt a deep, sinking loneliness. There was no telling when I would reach land. There was no knowing where we were going. Only this was certain. The ship poured out black smoke and cut through the waves. The waves were vast, endlessly blue, as far as the eye could see. At times, they turned purple. Only around the ship itself, the water foamed white without ceasing. I was terribly, deeply lonely. I thought, rather than staying on this ship, perhaps I should throw myself into the sea and die. There were many passengers on board. Most appeared to be foreigners. They had all manner of faces. Once, when the sky was overcast and the ship was rolling, a woman leaned against the railing and wept without stopping. The handkerchief she pressed to her eyes looked white. Her dress was something like printed calico. Seeing her, I realized I am not the only one who is sad. One evening, I came up onto the deck and stood alone, looking at the stars. A foreign man came over and asked whether I knew astronomy. I had been thinking of dying because everything felt so meaningless. I had no need to know astronomy. I said nothing. The man began to tell me about the 7 stars at the crown of Taurus. Then he said that the stars and the sea were all made by God. Finally, he asked me whether I believed in God. I looked up at the sky and said nothing. Another time, I went into the saloon. A young woman in a bright, elaborate dress sat with her back to me, playing the piano. Beside her stood a tall, fine-looking man, singing. His mouth, when I saw it, seemed very large, but the two of them were entirely absorbed in each other, entirely indifferent to everything else. They seemed to have even forgotten that they were on a ship at all. I grew more and more hollow inside. At last I decided to die. So one evening, when no one was around, I steeled myself and leapt into the sea. But the very instant my feet left the deck, the very instant my bond with the ship was severed, I was suddenly seized with a desperate wish to live. From the bottom of my heart, I thought I should not have done this, but it was already too late. Whether I wished it or not, I was going into the sea. The ship was apparently built very high. My body had left it, but my feet had not yet touched the water. There was nothing to hold on to. Gradually, slowly, I drew closer to the surface. No matter how I drew my feet up, I kept drawing closer. The color of the water was black. The ship, as always, poured out its black smoke and passed on. As I fell slowly toward the black waves, I understood for the first time that even a ship that goes nowhere, it is still better to remain on it. And yet that understanding was of no use to me now, carrying within me an infinite weight of regret and terror. I fell quietly toward the black waves below. Night 8. The Mirror and the Barber Shop. The moment I stepped across the threshold of the barber shop, 3 or 4 men in white clothes gathered close together. All said, "Welcome," at once. I stood in the middle and looked around. It was a square room. Windows opened on 2 sides. On the other 2 sides, mirrors hung. I counted the mirrors. There were 6. I came to stand before one of them and sat down. The seat gave a soft, yielding sound beneath me. A chair made for sitting in, with great comfort. My face appeared clearly in the mirror. Behind my face, I could see a window, and at an angle, the latticed cashier's partition. No one was inside it. Through the window, the upper halves of people passing on the street were clearly visible. Shotaro walked past with a woman. At some point, Shotaro had bought a Panama hat and was wearing it now. The woman, where she had come from, I couldn't say. Both of them looked rather pleased with themselves. I tried to get a good look at the woman's face, but they had already passed. A tofu vendor went by, blowing his horn. With the horn pressed to his mouth, his cheeks puffed out, as if stung by a bee. He passed like that, cheeks still swollen, and I couldn't stop worrying about him. He seemed destined to go through life looking as if a bee had stung him. A geisha came out. She had not yet done her makeup. The knot of her shimada hairstyle was loose. Her head had a kind of unfinished, unsettled air. Her face was still drowsy. Her complexion was so poor, it was almost pitiable. She bowed and said something polite, but whoever she was speaking to never appeared in the mirror. Then a large man in white came and stood behind me. He held scissors and a comb and began to study my head. I twisted my thin mustache and asked, "What do you think? Can anything be done with it?" The man in white said nothing and tapped my head lightly with the amber comb in his hand. "Well," my head aside, "what do you think? Can anything be made of it?" I asked him again. Still, he said nothing and began to click the scissors, open and shut. I had meant to keep my eyes wide open and watch every reflection in the mirror without missing one. But each time the scissors clicked, a strand of black hair flew toward me, and eventually, unnerved, I closed my eyes. Then the man in white said, "Sir, did you happen to see the goldfish seller out front?" I said I had not. The man said nothing more and went on clicking the scissors steadily. Then suddenly a loud voice cried, "Look out!" I snapped my eyes open. Beneath the sleeve of the man in white, I glimpsed a bicycle wheel. I glimpsed the shaft of a rickshaw. And then the man in white pressed both hands against my head and pushed it sharply to the side. The bicycle and the rickshaw disappeared entirely from view. The scissors clicked on. After a while, the man in white moved around to my side and began trimming near my ear. Since the hair was no longer flying toward my face, I opened my eyes with relief. Right nearby, a voice was calling, "Millet cakes here, mochi here." Mochi and the small sound of a pestle deliberately struck against a mortar, in rhythm, as the mochi was pounded. I had only seen a millet cake seller as a child, so I rather wanted to catch a glimpse. But the millet cake seller never appeared in the mirror. Only the sound of the pounding came through. I strained my eyes and peered into the corner of the mirror as best I could. There, inside the cashier's partition, a woman was sitting. She had not been there before. She was a tall, dark-complexioned woman with thick eyebrows, her hair done up in the Ichogeishi style, wearing a plain-lined kimono with a black satin collar. One knee raised, she was counting banknotes, 10-yen notes by the look of them. Her long lashes lowered, her thin lips pressed together. She counted with total concentration and at an astonishing speed. And yet the notes showed no sign of running out. There were perhaps 100 on her knee at most, but no matter how long she counted, there were still 100. I stared, dazed, at the woman's face and the 10-yen notes. Then the man in white said loudly in my ear, "Shall I wash it now?" The timing was perfect. The moment I rose from the chair, I turned and looked toward the cashier's partition. But inside the lattice, there was no woman, no banknotes. I paid and went outside. To the left of the entrance, about 5 oval wooden tubs were lined up, filled with goldfish, red ones, spotted ones, thin ones, fat ones, in great numbers. Behind them sat the goldfish seller. He was propped on one elbow, staring fixedly at the goldfish arranged before him, perfectly still, paying almost no attention to the bustling activity of the noisy street. I stood for a while and watched him, but the entire time I watched, the goldfish seller did not move at all. Night 9. The Mother's Prayer. The world had begun to grow restless, in a way that was hard to name. It felt as though war might break out at any moment. Burned-out horses, stripped bare, ran wild around the estate day and night without ceasing, and day and night without ceasing, foot soldiers crowded and jostled after them. Or so it seemed. And yet, inside the house, everything was utterly still. In the house lived a young mother and a child of 3. The father had gone somewhere. He had left on a moonless night. He had put on straw sandals while still on the floor, pulled a black hood over his head, and slipped out through the back gate. At that moment, the paper lantern the mother held cast a long, thin shaft of light into the dark, and it fell upon an old cypress just this side of the hedge. The father never came home after that. Every day, the mother asked the 3-year-old child, "Where is father?" For a while, the child said nothing. Then, after some time, it began to answer, "Over there." Even when the mother asked, "When will he come back?" the child answered, "Over there," and laughed. The mother laughed too at those times, and she taught the child again and again, "He'll be home soon." But the child learned only soon. Sometimes when asked where father was, it would answer, "Soon." When night fell and the neighborhood grew quiet, the mother would retighten her sash, tuck a shark-skin-handled short sword into it, tie the child onto her back with a narrow sash, and slip quietly out through the small gate. The mother always wore straw sandals. Sometimes the child listening to the sound of those sandals, would fall asleep on her back. She went west along the estate road, where earthen walls continued on either side, then down to the foot of a long, gradual slope, where a great ginkgo tree stood. Using the ginkgo as her landmark, she turned right, and about a cho further along, between rice paddies on one side and nothing but dwarf bamboo on the other, she came to a stone torii gate. Passing through it, she entered a dark stand of cedar. Then, following the paving stones for about 20 ken, she arrived at the foot of the steps leading up to the old oratory. On top of the weathered offering box, a thick rope hung down from a large bell. In the daytime, beside that bell, a plaque read, "Hachiman Shrine," the character for 8 written in the shape of 2 doves facing each other, which she had always found charming. There were other plaques as well, most of them recording the gold targets shot through by members of the household, each bearing the name of the one who had shot it. Some held dedicated swords. Passing through the torii, an owl always called from somewhere in the cedar boughs above, and the sound of her worn straw sandals, slap, 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 went on until it stopped before the oratory. First, the mother rang the bell. Then she crouched and clapped her hands in prayer. Almost always, at that moment, the owl would suddenly fall silent. Then she prayed with her whole heart for her husband's safety. In her mind, it was clear. Her husband was a samurai, and she had come to Hachiman, the god of bow and arrow, with a prayer born of desperation. Surely, such a prayer could not go unanswered. She was utterly certain of it. The child often woke at the sound of the bell. Finding everything around it pitch dark, it would suddenly begin to cry on her back. The mother, murmuring her prayers, would try to soothe it by swaying gently. Sometimes the child quieted. Sometimes it cried harder still. Either way, the mother would not easily rise from her prayer. When she had finished praying for her husband, she would untie the marrow sash, ease the child from her back, sliding it around from behind to the front, and hold it in both arms as she mounted the steps of the oratory. "Be good now," she would say, pressing her cheek firmly against the child's. "Just wait here a little while." She would lengthen the sash, bind the child, and tie one end to the railing of the oratory. Then she would come back down the steps and walk back and forth along the 20 ken of paving stones. The 100-time pilgrimage. The child, tied to the railing, crawled back and forth across the wide veranda in the darkness, as far as the sash would allow. On such nights, it was easy for the mother. But when the bound child cried out in thin, high wails, the mother could not bear it. Her feet moved faster and faster along the pilgrimage path. She grew badly out of breath. When there was no other way, she would stop in the middle, climb back up to the oratory, soothe the child with whatever she could, and then begin the 100 paces again. Night after night, like this, the mother wore herself with worry, lying awake through the dark hours, anxious for the husband she prayed for, and all the while, that husband had long since been killed by masterless samurai. I heard this sad story from my mother in the dream. Night 10, the Panama hat and the pigs. Ken-san came to tell me that Shitaro had wandered back home on the 7th evening after being carried off by the woman, and had promptly come down with a fever and taken to his bed. Shotaro was the finest-looking man in the neighborhood, and an exceedingly good-natured, honest sort. He had only one indulgence. He would put on his Panama hat, and every evening toward dusk, he would sit at the front of the fruit shop and watch the faces of the women passing in the street. He was endlessly admiring. Beyond that, he had no particular distinguishing traits. On evenings, when not many women passed, he would stop watching the street and watch the fruit instead. There was a great variety of it: white peaches, apples, loquats, bananas, arranged beautifully in baskets, lined up in 2 rows, ready to be taken as gifts at a moment's notice. Shotaro would look at these baskets and say, "Beautiful." He would say that if he ever went into business, it would have to be a fruit shop. And yet, he himself did nothing but wander about at leisure in his Panama hat. He would admire the color of a summer tangerine and offer his expert opinion, but he had never once paid money for a piece of fruit. He would never eat one for free, of course. He simply admired the colors. One evening, a woman appeared suddenly at the shop front. She was clearly a person of some standing. Her dress was splendid. The color of her kimono pleased Shotaro enormously, and on top of that, he was deeply struck by her face, so he removed his precious Panama hat and greeted her with great courtesy. The woman pointed to the largest basket on display and said, "I'll take that one." Shotaro immediately took the basket and handed it over. The woman lifted it for a moment, then said, "My, how heavy it is." Shotaro was an idle man by nature, and uncommonly obliging, so he said, "Then allow me to carry it to your home," and walked out of the fruit shop with her. He never came back after that. Even for Shotaro, people said this was going too far. Something was not right. Relatives and friends grew alarmed, and then, on the 7th evening, he wandered home. Everyone crowded around him at once. "Shota, where on earth have you been?" Shotaro answered, "I took a tram up into the mountains." It must have been quite a long tram ride. According to Shotaro, the moment he got off the tram, he found himself in an open field, an immensely wide field, nothing but green grass, as far as he could see. He walked across the grass with the woman, and suddenly they came out at the very edge of a sheer cliff. At that point, the woman said to Shotaro, "Go ahead and jump." He looked down over the edge. He could see the sheer rock face, but the bottom was nowhere in sight. Shotaro removed his Panama hat again and declined, again and again, most earnestly. Then the woman said, "If you are not willing to jump, you will be licked by pigs. Is that all right with you?" Shotaro had a profound hatred of pigs and of the popular singer Unimo as well, but he thought, "Still, it is not worth my life," and continued to hold back from jumping. Just then, a pig came trotting up, snorting through its nose. Shotaro had no choice. He struck the pig on the snout with the slender areca palm walking stick he was carrying. The pig gave a grunt, rolled over, and fell off the cliff. Shotaro had barely drawn a breath of relief when another pig came pushing its great snout against him. He swung the cane again. The pig grunted and tumbled headlong into the abyss. Then another appeared. At that moment, Shotaro happened to look up and saw, from where the vast green field ended, in the far distance, an uncountable multitude of pigs, tens of thousands, moving in a dense herd in a straight line, snorting and heading directly for Shotaro, where he stood at the cliff's edge. Shotaro was seized with genuine dread, but there was nothing else to do. He went on carefully striking each approaching pig on the snout, one by one, with his areca palm walking stick. Strangely, the moment the stick touched a snout, the pig would roll over and fall into the valley below. Looking down, he could see an endless procession of upside-down pigs falling in a line down the bottomless cliff face. He thought, "Have I really sent this many pigs into the ravine?" The thought frightened even himself. But the pigs kept coming, like a black cloud-grown legs parting the green grass, snorting on without end. Shotaro summoned every last bit of desperate courage and struck pig snouts for 7 days and 6 nights. But at last his strength gave out entirely. His arm went as limp as konnyaku, and in the end, he was licked by a pig, and he collapsed on the edge of the cliff. Ken-san finished telling Shotaro's story at this point and said, "So you see, it's not a good idea to stare at women too much." I thought he had a point, and yet Ken-san said he would very much like to have Shotaro's Panama hat. Shotaro will probably not recover. The Panama will likely go to Ken-san.